Hey everybody, Joe Price here. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on the computer converter that I actually featured in previous videos, but the intent behind this video is to actually fully explain how that computer functions, what all of the interlocking pieces are, how they fit together, and give you the opportunity to actually build one for yourself if you're so inclined. Alright, so first let's revisit how the computer can be operated. And we're just going to go to the teleport hub directory here. This is under the heading B7 ALU binary to decimal converter. ALU, that just stands for Arithmetic Logic Unit. Alright, so let's input B7. And here we are. Alright, so what we're looking at is the computer mechanism itself. It's actually mostly below us. And wiring is pretty complicated, but as I'm going to explain a little bit later in this video, we shouldn't really focus that much on the wiring itself. Instead, we should focus more on the logic behind how everything is put together. And the wiring will just necessarily follow from that logic. So that's the ALU, and over to the right here, this gigantic mechanism, and I'll just walk around it, is the converter from binary to decimal. It necessarily has to be really big for reasons that I'll get into in a later video. This video, I'm just going to be focusing on the ALU function, the computer function here. Now, this particular version of the computer has been updated from my previous versions. There have been some minor improvements, most notably I made it so that every mathematical operation, there's just one lever pull that is necessary, and you'll see that in a moment. So first, just to orient ourselves as to what is going on here, we see a number of numbers, number of levers. So the ALU has three separate registers. The registers just store information, binary information, in the form of numbers in this ALU. So up top here we have the accumulator register, and note that it's got a number of bits. It's got 9 bits in total, and it can store up to 511. It can store numbers from 0 up to 511. Directly below me is the memory register. The memory register also can store numbers from 0 to 511. And finally, to my right, is the MQ register. And this is a little bit smaller, it's just 8-bit, and it can store numbers up to 255. Now, this is not because there are any particular limits to the number of bits that I can have. I can extend this much further, but if I create bigger registers, it just will slow down things slightly. For demonstration purposes, I chose these sizes for these registers. Things are decently fast with this size computer. Alright, so next, as far as the calculations that we're going to do, most of them are going to be showing up in the accumulator register. There's one exception though, and that exception, the reasons for it, we'll get into that when we get to the tutorial part of this video. Also, once we finish doing a calculation, regardless of whether the final answer shows up in the accumulator register or the MQ register, a converter will kick into gear, and it'll convert the binary answers into decimal. And the screen up top here will have the final answer for us. Alright, so let's get right to it. The first mathematical operation I want to take a look at is multiplication. In a sense, most of the arithmetic functions are really just multiplications. That includes addition, that includes subtraction. And the reason for that is whatever is stored in the memory register will be transferred to the accumulator register some number of times, and the number of times that will be transferred is actually dictated by the MQ register. So that is how all three of these registers are tied in together. So if I want to do a multiplication, I'll just input some number into memory, and that number will be transferred to the accumulator register X number of times, where X is the number I put into the MQ register. All right, so let's take a look at an example. So let's say I put in 64, 68, 70, so I've got 70 here in the memory register, and let's say I input 4 into the MQ register. So 70 is going to be added 4 times to the accumulator, effectively performing the calculation 70 times 4. All right, so we should end up with 280 popping up in our accumulator register, and of course the converter will kick into gear and we'll get 280 displayed using decimal notation on screen. So to execute the multiplication function, we just pull the M lever, M standing for multiplication. All right, let's see how this works. Okay, let's start cycling here 4 times. All right, so there we have it. So the converter has now kicked into gear. It takes about 16 seconds to convert each binary number into a decimal. And we see already that in the accumulator register, 280 has popped up. Okay, let's just wait until it pops up here. There we go. 280 is our final answer. All right, so that's multiplication. That's clear. Let's do just one more example. Let's say we do 32, 42, 48, 50. And let's say we multiply 50 times 3. Okay, pull the M lever again, and we should get 150 displayed in the accumulator register. Okay, there we go. So indeed, we have 150 displayed there in the accumulator, and now we just wait for the converter to finish its operations, and we should get 150 displayed on screen. There we go, 150 displayed on screen. Okay, so that was multiplication. Next up, addition. So addition is essentially multiplication in the sense that we are still transferring the numbers stored in memory to the accumulator some number of times. But for addition, we only want to transfer the contents of the memory once and to an already existing number in the accumulator. Okay, so for instance, let's say that we input 40 here into memory, and let's say we have 20 already in the accumulator register. So we have to enter 1 into the MQ register. So that just means that this number 40 will be transferred once to the accumulator, adding to the total that's present there already. Right, so we should end up with 40 plus 20, 60. Let's see if that happens. So we're still pulling the multiplication lever to execute the action here. Let's take a look. Yeah, considerably faster, this addition. Only cycles once. And the converter has kicked into gear. In the meantime, we can already see that in the accumulator register, we have 60 entered. Alright, there we have it. 60 has popped up on screen. That is the correct answer to our addition of 40 plus 20. Okay, so that was addition. Next up, subtraction. So subtraction is really addition in disguise, although it takes advantage of the fact that there's a rollover when you add to the accumulator register, and the accumulator register is already full. It's already at its maximum value of 511 here. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail as to the logic behind that. For the time being, I'm just going to demonstrate how the subtraction takes place. So to subtract, I'm also going to keep it simple and only focus on positive integer answers. Okay, so to achieve that, the number that I input into memory will have to be larger than the number that I input into the accumulator register. All right, so let's say that I input 80 into memory, and from that I will subtract 10. Okay, so our final outcome should be 70 here. And once again, I'm only going to be subtracting once, so I just need to input 1 into the MQ register. I also need to pull a different lever here. I'll be pulling the S lever. It's got an extra connection, which again I'll explain a little bit later in the tutorial portion of this video. For the time being, let's watch as we have the operation 80 minus 10. Alright, so there we have it. So we see that the answer on screen here in the accumulator register is 70. That is indeed our correct answer. And let's just wait for the converter to finish converting, and then we should see 70 on screen here. There we have it. 70 has popped up. Alright, so that was subtraction. And just one more arithmetic operation to go, and that is division. So division is a little bit trickier as far as how to execute it. However, this particular ALU design has simplified things greatly, so that once again we just have one pull of the lever. A couple of things of note though. We are going to be inputting nothing this time around in the MQ register, because the MQ register will serve as our accumulator in this particular calculation, so it will contain the final answer. Also, when it comes to division, you can of course have decimal outcomes, not always going to be integer values, but for the purposes of this video, again, I'll keep it simple and just focus on integer outcomes. So to do the division, we have to put the larger number into the accumulator register, the smaller number that we're going to divide into that number into memory, and then we'll pull the D lever for division. Alright, so let's take a look. Let's say we do 70, and let's say we divide that by 7. Okay, so I'm going to pull the D lever, and once again we'll be looking at the MQ register for the final answer. Now the way that this has all been wired, even though the answer is now going to be in the NQ register, nevertheless the converter will kick into gear and the answer will pop up on screen. Alright, let's demonstrate. So again, this is 70 divided by 7. This will take a little bit, because the MQ register, it essentially counts up to the final answer, which will be 10. Okay, halfway there. Almost 208. There we go. So 10 is our final answer, stored in the MQ register currently, and the converter is once again kicked into gear. The final answer of 10 will pop up on screen. And if you just want to take a look at what's going on during the cycling, well, there you have it. Again, it's pretty complicated, the entire setup, which I will explain in a later video, this conversion. Alright, so 10 is our final answer, and that is indeed correct. So there it is, the ALU in action, capable of performing basic arithmetic functions. And this particular ALU, the way that it has been designed, we can fully extend all three of these registers. We can make them fairly large, but the larger they are, well, the slower the actual mathematical operations are. It'll take a little bit longer to do all of the cycling. Alright, so let's clear. So next up, let's head over to a computer tutorial world, and we're going to take a look at the individual components of this ALU. Okay, so let's head there now. As always, I'll be making the tutorial world available for download if you want to play around with some of these smaller mechanisms and get a better sense of how everything functions. So the entire ALU in this tutorial world has been replicated just on the right here. And on the left are the individual components. which we're going to be discussing in this tutorial part of the video. So the first thing I want to talk about are the basic repeating components of 2 of the 3 registers, and those are flip-flops. So all a flip-flop is just a Hoik junction point where the skeleton can take one of 2 paths. When the skeleton takes one path, a subsequent skeleton will take the alternate path. So let's direct our attention to this particular flip-flop. Okay, if we take a look at the wiring here, note that right at the junction of these 2 Hoiks, the one going to the right and one going up, there is an actuator placed on that particular Hoik tooth, and it's connected by wire to a couple of pressure plates. Okay, in its current state, deactuated state, the skeleton that's going to be summoned into this Hoik system will pass straight across and into the lava trap on the right here. Now in doing so, it'll pass over this pressure plate, and this pressure plate feeds back onto that Hoik tooth, actuating it, which means that a subsequent skeleton will go straight up instead. When that skeleton goes straight up, it'll pass over this pressure plate up top, which again feeds back onto that Hoik tooth, deactuating it, resetting it back to how we see it right now. So that's the idea behind the flip-flops. They keep directing the skeleton to go through alternating paths each time a skeleton is summoned. Let's demonstrate that. Okay, so first skeleton we see goes straight across, and the tooth becomes actuated, so the next skeleton goes straight up, then across, straight up, across, straight up, so on and so forth. So this is a repeating unit that we're going to see in the 2 of the registers in the ALU. Now, the actual flip-flops that I use in the registers, they're designed slightly differently. They're designed to be a little bit more compact and thus shave off time that it takes to do certain computations. So if we take a look at the design here, this is the one that I've elected to use in the ALU. But of course, this is not to say that other designs cannot be used, and perhaps at some point somebody will come up with an even better design, but this one works quite well. Alright, so once again, there's a junction point. This particular Hoik tooth dictates whether or not the skeleton is going to go straight across or if it's going to go up. If it goes straight across, the pressure plate up here is the one that's going to be triggered. You can see by the wiring, it feeds back onto that Hoik tooth at the junction. So when the skeleton goes straight across, it'll activate that pressure plate and actuate the Hoik tooth. So the next skeleton will move straight up, and it can actually move through the teleporter, but that's because the middle portion of the teleporter has been sloped. If you did not know this before, you can actually create slopes. You can create Hoik teeth in the teleporters themselves. There are 3 segments of each teleporter, so each of the 3 segments can be shaped. We only need to shape the middle segment to allow the skeleton to be hoiked straight up. Now, when it is hoiked straight up, it'll trigger this particular pressure plate up top here, which, again, if we check the wiring, does loop back to that Hoik tooth. Thus, this is also a flip-flop mechanism. The other thing that it does, it's connected through green wire to the teleporter itself. So that teleporter is still functioning as a teleporter. And we're just going to teleport the skeleton to the death trap here. But of course, in the actual registers, the teleportation, that'll take place in a different way. The skeleton will be teleported to a different location. We'll see that in due time. For the moment, let's just see how this works. Okay, so pull the lever, skeleton goes straight across. This Hoik tooth at the junction has been actuated, so the next skeleton will go up. There we go. Went up, across, goes up, across. When it goes up, it's really, really fast. It's hard to see, but you can still see the little particle trail resulting from the skeleton being hoiked upwards and teleported to the death trap to the right. Alright, so let's take a look at the first of 3 registers, and the first register that employs these flip-flops. So, let's go up here. The first register here is the accumulator register. Okay, so we saw from the demonstration of how the LEU functions that the accumulator register for most of the calculations will contain the final answer. And these registers, I've shortened them to be just 5-bit. It's sufficient for our demonstration purposes of how these registers do function here. And one thing to note about the accumulator register is that it's really nothing more than a binary counter. Okay, so the way that a binary counter will operate here is just a string of flip-flop mechanisms that have been pieced together here. Now there's 5 flip-flop mechanisms, although you see that there are 6 repeating units here. The final unit is not a flip-flop, that's just the final destination of the skeleton if it were to pass straight through. There's a particular reason why I do this at the very end. I'll explain that later. But for the moment, I'm just interested in the other 5 units, because those are actual flip-flops here. Right, so when there is nothing stored in the accumulator, the default state of all of these Hoik teeth is actuated. Alright, so that means the first skeleton that I summon will go straight up. When it goes straight up, we'll of course trigger that pressure plate as we saw already, deactuating that Hoik tooth, but on top of that, it'll send a signal to the torches up above. It'll light them up to indicate that information has been stored in this first bit. Or to put it into numerical terms, we just added the number 1 to the accumulator. Alright, so when this Hoik tooth becomes deactuated, that means the next skeleton that passes through, well, will go to the right, and then when it reaches the next junction point, it'll go upwards. When it goes upwards, it'll trigger a pressure plate that'll turn on the light above 2, so then 2 will be stored in the accumulator. On top of that, when the skeleton passes straight through, it'll pass over this particular pressure plate, actuating this Hoik tooth again, turning off the light that is stored in this first bit. So then we transition from the number 1 to the number 2 that's stored in the accumulator. Let's demonstrate this. Okay, first skeleton. Okay, notice it went straight up, turned on the light here, and notice this Hoik tooth has become deactuated. So next skeleton will end up over here at this teleporter. There we go. That's exactly what happened. And that Hoik tooth has now become deactuated. This Hoik tooth is actuated again, and now we have the number 2 stored in the accumulator. Okay, the next pull, the skeleton is going to go straight up here, adding 1 to the accumulator total. Alright, so it just keeps going like that, using these flip-flops to add to the accumulator 1 number at a time. Okay, so we're at 3 now. The next pull, we're up to 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8, so on and so forth. Alright, so again, the accumulator is just a binary counter. The only difference is that at any time we can add numbers through either lever pulls, or as we're going to demonstrate a little bit later, we can add numbers from the memory register, as opposed to having to add 1 every time to the accumulator, the way that just a regular binary counter would function. Okay, so that's the accumulator. Next, let's take a look at the MQ register. Okay, so from that demonstration just a moment ago, we saw that the MQ register dictated how many times we were going to transfer information from memory to the accumulator. So the MQ register is really nothing more than a reverse binary counter. It counts down. And to get it to count down, all we do, we have the exact same setup as we had in the accumulator register. The only difference is that all of these Hoik teeth, their polarity has been reversed, meaning instead of being in the actuated state, they start off being in the deactuated state. Alright, so let's suppose that we enter 4 into the MQ register. Well, that means that once I start sending skeletons into this reverse binary counter, it's going to start counting down from the number that has already been input. Okay, so right now it's at 4. The next number that is going to appear is 3 when I send a skeleton in. And the reason why it's going to end up as 3 is as follows. So the skeleton will go straight through and it'll be hoiked upwards here at the 4 position. When it's hoiked upwards, again, the wiring here, it feeds back onto the torches up top. So it'll shut those torches off. Now in the meantime, when it passes through and triggers the pressure plates along the way, it'll end up actuating the hoik teeth along the way and turning on the numbers directly above, thus going from 4 to 3. Let's demonstrate. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so the next pull, the skeleton will pass through, and at this first junction will go straight up, again triggering that pressure plate, deactuating that hoik tooth, shutting off the torches here, thus will go from 3 to 2. Yep. And next skeleton, as it passes through, it'll, because of the actuation of this hoik tooth, go straight up, turn off the light at the 2 position, and along the way, it'll pass over this particular pressure plate, which will turn on the light at the 1 position and actuate that hoik tooth. Yeah, just like that. And the final skeleton that we send through, well, it'll be hoiked upwards here, passing over that pressure plate, shutting this off, and then reducing the count to 0. There we have it. So that is what the MQ register is designed to do. It just counts down from a particular number. So the MQ register, it's not just for these arithmetic logic units. The MQ register can be used in other contraptions to basically dictate how many times a given mechanism will go through its motions. So if you input 3 into the MQ register, that will tell some other mechanism do your operations 3 times. Alright, so next is our memory register. Now the memory register, the actual memory part, is extremely straightforward. And that is, if you take a look at the wiring here, just the red wires connected to just a pair of blocks. And that's it. So the information that's stored, it's in the form of the actuation or deactuation state of just a pair of blocks. Now, the significance behind this is that this will actually alter the path that a skeleton is going to subsequently take. But note that there are no flip-flops involved here. So once we actually input some number into memory, it stays like that. It's not going to be altered when the mechanism is undergoing its computations. So then what's all this then directly below? Okay, so this is the distributor. A distributor serves the purpose of reading memory and then performing the tasks based on how this entire mechanism is used and what sort of contraption this is used. So a distributor, the way that it functions is a skeleton is going to be summoned here, and it will end up visiting all 5 bits here, and it's simply going to check to see what the state of each bit is going to be, whether it's in the on or off state. Okay, so this first bit here, if we're in the on state, the skeleton that will pass through here will detect this. It'll detect it by essentially passing straight through the open portion. When it's closed, it'll take a different path. It'll take a path to the immediate left instead. Alright, so let's take a look at the wiring here. So you note that there are a lot of junction points once again, but again, there are no flip-flops here. At all of these junction points are hoik teeth with actuators on them. So the default state is all of these hoik teeth at all of these junctions are in the actuated state. Okay, so let's follow the path of the skeleton. So the skeleton, when it reaches the first junction point, it'll be hoiked straight up, and for the moment, we'll have 0 input into memory. So that means all of these ceilings will be in their deactuated state. They're all going to be closed. So the skeleton is going to be hoiked upwards. It'll pass over this pressure plate, and when it does so, it feeds back through red wire, and it will deactuate that hoiked tooth. Additionally, the skeleton that's going to be hoiked upwards, because of these teeth at the very top, it'll be hoiked immediately to the left into this waiting teleporter. Now, this teleporter feeds back to the initial teleport at the start of the distributor. Now, you might be wondering, what's with this lengthy wire here? Why do I snake it around like this? The reason for that is all 5 of these teleporters are hooked up to the same wire. So the problem is that, what would stop the skeleton from teleporting from one teleporter to some arbitrary teleporter instead of the teleporter that we want the skeleton to go to? Well, it turns out that in Terraria, the way that teleportation works, if you have 3 or more teleporters linked together, is as follows. When an NPC or a player enters a teleporter, it always ends up getting teleported to the most distant teleporter. And the most distant teleporter, this is measured by not in-game length, but by wire length. Okay, so that's the logic behind this long, snaking green wire. This just ensures that whichever these 5 teleporters the skeleton steps into, it'll always end up in the most distant teleporter by wire. Alright, so let's come back over here. So the skeleton, after passing through the top portion here, entering the teleporter, starts back at the beginning teleporter, and then it'll end up going straight across to the next junction point. It'll get hoiked upwards. It'll check the state of the next bit in memory, and again, if it's closed, that ceiling, it'll be hoiked immediately to the left, to the next teleporter, so on and so forth. So this way, the skeleton will end up passing through all 5 vertical portions. When it passes through the final vertical portion, and again teleports to the start, it'll end up passing straight through, and there's one last pressure plate here. It's connected via green wire to all of these hoik teeth. So that basically resets all the hoik teeth to the default actuated position. Okay, let's watch the cycling in action. There we go. So again, that skeleton visited all 5 positions, all 5 bits. Now, if any of these ceilings were open, like let's say the 8th ceiling, then the skeleton, when it cycles through, it would end up actually taking a different path. Instead of going to the teleporter, it'll go straight up. Now, I can't demonstrate it here. I have to actually hook this up to something, and you'll see how it's hooked up in just a second. Alright, so that's the memory register plus the distributor that serves to read from memory, look at what the state is of every bit, whether it's on or off, every bit in the memory register. Alright, so that's it. As far as the 3 registers are concerned that make up the ALU. So let's take a look at what happens when we start combining some of these registers and what sort of mathematical operations we're able to do. Let's just focus on basic addition for the moment. Okay, so basic addition, we have to merge together the accumulator register and the memory register. Okay, so here's the wiring, and just to the bottom here, we see the distributor all the way at the bottom, and the ceilings, the pair of blocks, are all in the deactuated state for the moment. Just check the wiring here. So we can see it's connected by blue wire to the levers directly below me. Okay, so that's going to be the way I'm going to be storing numbers into memory. So directly above that is that binary counter, our accumulator register, and the actuation state of the hoik teeth in the accumulator, that's connected through red wire to the levers that are directly above me. There's also a bridge created between the distribution system and the accumulator register. Okay, so when a ceiling is open, let's demonstrate that. So if I store 1 in memory here, I'll open up the ceiling. That means that when a skeleton passes through, when it goes upwards here, the ceiling being the actuated state means that it'll go straight up and actually enter the accumulator register. And that'll enter at the 1 position, so it'll alter the state of the 1 position in the accumulator register. It'll essentially add 1 or remove 1, depending on what the state of that particular bit happens to be. Alright, so let's demonstrate this. We're going to pull the lever, and again, we're going to see the skeleton cycle 5 times. It'll check every one of these bits in memory, and at the first bit here, it will transfer that information to the accumulator register. So the end result of us pulling the lever, we should see the 1 being added to the accumulator here. The light will show up. Let's take a look. Yep, there we go. So in addition, all we're doing is transferring the contents of memory to the accumulator register. Now we can do this multiple times. So if I pull the lever again, once again, I will transfer that 1 from memory. And since I already have 1 stored in the accumulator register, this is going to go from 1 to 2. Because remember, this is still a binary counter. So anytime you feed any skeleton into this mechanism, it'll just serve as a regular binary counter. It'll bump up the number by 1. Okay, let's take a look. Yeah, there we go. So we just went from 1 to 2 in the accumulator register. Okay, so let's clear this. Let's try a different number. So let's say we input 5 here into memory. So this time around, the skeleton, when it's going through the distributor, it'll end up passing through the ceiling at the 1 position, passing through the ceiling at the 4 position, and thus we will add to the 1 position and the 4 position in the accumulator register. Let's take a look. Yeah, there we go. So we have 1 and 4. So we transferred 5. Now if I pull the lever again, I will transfer another 5 into the accumulator register. So the exact same thing is going to happen. The skeleton will be hoiked straight up at the 1 position to the accumulator. Then a little bit later, it's going to be hoiked straight up at the 4 position into the accumulator, thereby adding another 5 to what's already present in the accumulator. So since we already have 5 in the accumulator, we'll go from 5 to 10. Let's take a look. There we go. 10 is what we now have stored in the accumulator register. Alright, so this is how addition functions. You have some number already in the accumulator register. Let's do one more example. Let's say I have 3 there. We'll have some number put into memory. Let's say 8. Actually, let's say 9 here. And pulling the lever here would mean that we're transferring the 9 to the 3, thus doing the addition of 9 plus 3. There we go. Final answer is 12. Okay, so this is addition when it comes to our arithmetic logic units. So this time around, let's take a look at what happens when we join all 3 of the registers together. So this time we will have addition and multiplication. Okay, so our MQ register has been added to this entire system, and the MQ register will now be dictating exactly how many times we're going to be adding the contents of memory to our accumulator register. Okay, so that means that we have to alter things a little bit in terms of the fate of the skeleton. So let's direct our attention to just the very bottom here, and let's take a look at the wiring. So the first thing we'll note is that when the lever is pulled, okay, if you follow the blue wire, the skeleton will first enter the MQ register. Okay, it has to enter there first because the MQ register is dictating exactly how many times it will need to perform operations. And if the MQ register is 0, then when the skeleton gets teleported here, it'll just pass straight through into the lava trap and basically do nothing. But if we have at least 1 stored into the MQ register, then it'll teleport the skeleton into the distributor. So if we take a look, all of these teleporters in the MQ register, they're connected by the long wire here to the teleporter at the start of the distributor. So the sequence of events is as follows. Skeleton first enters the MQ register, then gets teleported into the distributor. When it goes through and checks all 5 bits of memory, it'll end up passing through this these Hoik teeth. Ends up passing through into the MQ register again, so it just keeps cycling like that. MQ register, then distributor, back to the MQ register, back to the distributor, until the MQ register holds no other values. It's all 0, and then at that point the skeleton will just pass straight through into the lava trap. Alright, so if we want to do the addition again, so again, let's do 9 plus 3. We have to just input one more thing, and that's into the MQ register. We have to input 1 to basically instruct this entire system to perform the addition of 9 to 3 one time. Alright, let's see all of this in action. Alright, there we go. Okay, so as you saw there, the skeleton appeared at the MQ register first, then it went through its rapid cycle here through all the through the distributor, and then final answer 12 popped up in the accumulator register. Okay, all of these got turned on as well. They always do. So we just have to shut them off. Of course, in the actual ALU, I have entire reset mechanisms, so that way with one pull of lever I reset everything. Here I refrain from adding them just to avoid making the wiring too complicated. Just keeping it nice and simple, so I have to do things manually. I have to shut things off manually. Okay, so let's do some sort of multiplication now, other than just multiplying by 1. So let's say I want to do 8 times 2. Alright, so this time around, when the skeleton is summoned into the MQ register, it'll actually pass through the MQ register twice, which means that it'll end up at the distributor twice as well, which means that it'll end up adding that 8 twice to the accumulator. So in our accumulator, our final answer should be 16. So that's effectively multiplying 8 times 2. Okay, let's see this in action. There we go. Alright, so 8 was indeed added twice, 16 is our final answer. Okay, let's do one more for demonstration purposes. Okay, shut these off. Alright, so next let's do 5 times 4. Okay, so we'll take this 5 and add it 4 times to the accumulator register. Let's take a look. It's once, adding it twice, 3 times, 4 times. Alright, so there we have it. 20 is our final outcome, and indeed, that is the right answer when we multiplied 5 times that 4. So this is how addition and multiplication works in arithmetic logic units. And again, just to summarize, our MQ register is the one that dictates, it's a reverse binary counter, it's the one that dictates how many times our signal is going to pass through the distribution system and check memory, check all 5 bits of memory, and then transfer the contents of memory to the accumulator X number of times, X being the number that we input into the MQ register. Okay, so that was addition and multiplication. So now we still have to do subtraction and division. So for subtraction and division, we have to add a complement system. So let's explain by coming back over here and revisiting our accumulator. So a complement of a number that we input into the accumulator register works as follows. Okay, we'll note that this register is 5-bit, so the largest possible number that we can store here is 31. If we go past 31, there's a rollover. In fact, let's take a look at what exactly happens when we want to do just basic binary counting here. Okay, so I'll start with 30. Okay, so the next number that I add, okay, we'll take it to 31. And the next number that I add, there's a rollover. So we go from 31 to 0. And then it starts again. Okay, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So what a complement is whatever number is stored here, okay, let's say we store the number 3, taking the complement of that would mean going to the largest value, 31 that can be stored, subtracting from that the number that is already input here. So here we would have 31 minus this 3. And then we still have to add 1 on top of that. Okay, adding 1 on top of that is to account for the fact that during the rollover, we don't roll over from 31 to 1, we roll over from 31 to 0. Okay, the logic behind that will become much clearer in a moment when we actually talk about how subtraction is done and how division is done. For the time being, though, just to understand what the complement is, again, it's just taking the maximum value, 31, subtracting from that what is input initially, and then adding 1 on top of that. Now, how does that actually work in terms of the mechanism itself? How do we make that happen? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. Okay, so to first do the subtraction, 31 minus the 3, all we have to do is shut off the lights here above 1 and 2, and thus change the actuation state of those teeth, and turn on the lights above 4, 8, and 16, and again, flip the actuation states of the teeth below. Okay, so if we shut off 1 and 2 and turn on everything else, well, that's effectively doing 31 minus 3. And then since we have to add 1 on top of that, well, all we have to do then, after switching the polarity of every one of these Hoik teeth, is just to send a skeleton through the binary counter once, just the way that we normally do in our binary counter. So the way this is done through wiring, if we take a look at the blue wire, so this lever, it's the C lever, complement lever, it passes through all of the torches, so it'll reverse the polarity of all the torches, and it passes through all of the Hoik teeth, reversing all of their polarity, and lastly, it's hooked up to the skeleton statue here, so it'll teleport the skeleton into this teleporter, and thus add 1 to the number that's generated. Alright, so let's take a look. Okay, so we have 3, so the complement of this would be 31 minus 3 plus 1, so that's 29. Let's take a look. There we go. So 29 has now been input into the accumulator register. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So let's say we have 10 input into the accumulator. So if we take the complement, that would mean 31 minus 10 plus 1. Okay, so 31 minus 10 would be 21, plus 1, 22. So taking the complement, there we go. We've got 22 that's now stored in the accumulator. Alright, so that's how the complement system works. But the big question is, why are we doing this? Why is this necessary? Okay, so let's come back over here. Okay, same setup as before when we were just doing the addition. We were just combining the accumulator register and the memory register, but now we have the complement system present, which means that this now permits for the addition and subtraction of numbers. So let's take a look at how this complement system has been implemented here specifically. Okay, so Again, it's the green wire that's hooked up to this lever, this complement lever, and again, it's passing through all of the torches here, reversing their polarity. Down here, it's passing through all of the Hoik teeth in the accumulator, again, reversing their polarity. It's also going to summon a skeleton into the binary counter, the accumulator register. So, just like before. However, there's one additional thing that we have to modify here. So, these teleporters in the accumulator register, they're all designed to teleport the skeleton back into the distributor. Now, we can't have that happen when we hit the complement button. We don't want the skeleton to actually start going through the distributor. All we want is just the skeleton to go through the accumulator register once, and that's it. So to deal with this issue of all of these teleporters connecting to the distributor teleporter, well, we just alter the path right at the start here. Okay, if you look at this Hoik tooth, normally the skeleton, when it appears here, it just is hoiked immediately to the right and just enters the distributor. But if we hit the complement button, if you again follow the green wire here, it'll actuate that particular Hoik tooth, which would mean that any skeleton that gets teleported here will end up just going straight up through the up Hoik. When it goes straight up, it will of course be killed in the lava, but there is a pressure plate that's submerged in that lava there that's connected through blue wire, and it feeds back onto that Hoik tooth. So we'll just reset the Hoik tooth back to its deactuated state after all of this takes place. So let's demonstrate that here. So let's say we have a number like 7, and we're going to take the complement of that. Okay, so once again, that'll be 31 minus 7 plus 1. So 31 minus 7 would give us 24, plus 1 gives us 25. So hitting the complement, notice how that skeleton died in that lava trap. And here we have the number 25 that's now present in our accumulator. Alright, so that's the slight modification that we had to now make when we combined the accumulator and the memory registers. So now the logic behind this. How does this help us when it comes to subtraction? So the thing about subtraction is that it's really just addition again. We can't change the fact that we're still transferring contents from memory into the accumulator register. But we take advantage of the fact that we have rollover when it comes to the accumulator. Okay, so let's work with a concrete example. Let's suppose that we want to do the subtraction 10 minus 3. Okay, so we know that the outcome here is going to be 7. Alright, so when we take the complement, we're going to go from 3 to 31 minus 3 plus 1. Okay, so 29. Okay, so let's take the complement now. Okay, so there we go, 29. So what's going to happen now when we add this 10 that's in memory to the accumulator is as follows. In the accumulator, we are 2 away from the maximum value of 31. Okay, so of the 10 that we're going to transfer, the first 2 of the 10 that we're going to transfer goes towards reaching the maximum value of 31. The next one that we add is going to roll over from 31 to 0. Okay, so again, if we're following along, we just use 2 out of the 10 from memory to boost it up to the accumulator number to 31. We'll take another one from memory to roll it over from 31 to 0, and then we have 7 left to transfer from memory. And that 7 that we then transfer would mean that we go from 0 to 7 in the accumulator. But 7 is the answer. That is the result of subtracting 3 from 10. Okay, so that's the entire logic behind subtraction. It's still addition in the sense that we're still adding from the memory to the accumulator, but we're exploiting the fact that we have this turnover once we are very close to the maximum value that can be stored in the accumulator. And that plus 1 that we have to do when we take the complement, that's only because when we churn over the number in the accumulator, it churns over from its maximum to 0. And thus we always have to add 1 when we take the complement. Alright, well, let's demonstrate this. So again, we were doing 10 minus 3, so we take the complement and then we turn on the mechanism to do the actual computation, so we should see 7 in our accumulator register. There we have it. 7 is indeed the correct answer. Okay, so let's try one more example. Let's say we do 20 minus 4, so we should end up with 16. So take the complement, do the calculation. And 16 is indeed what we end up with. Perfect. So that is the complement system, and it permits subtraction to be done. Okay, so turn everything off here. So there's just one last thing to look at, and that is how is it exactly that we can accomplish division. So for division, we will also need this complement system. So let's come over here. And as you can see by the header, this is the complete arithmetic logic unit. Just 5-bit here. All of these registers are 5-bit. So we have the complement system as before, but there are some further alterations that we have to make specifically for division. None of the other functions are going to be altered, so multiplication, addition, subtraction work the exact same way, but division. So here is the difference. So in division, the final answer will actually end up appearing in the MQ register. Now for that to happen, we have to transform the MQ register from a countdown binary counter to just a regular count up binary counter. So in other words, we will be transforming the MQ register into effectively an accumulator register. So that can be done very easily. The way that we can do that is by simply switching the polarity of every one of the Hoik teeth in the MQ register. If you recall, that was the only difference between the accumulator register and the MQ register, that in the MQ register, all of the Hoik teeth, that you see at the very bottom here, they all started off in their deactuated state. Alright, so I have a lever here for that. Okay, this lever up top, connected by blue wire, and it's just connected to all 5 of those Hoik teeth, so I'll reverse their polarity. Okay, so the light comes on here just to indicate that I have reverse polarity, and you can see at the very bottom, all of the Hoik teeth are now in the actuated state. Alright, so I have to do one more thing here, one other alteration, and that is to the accumulator register. So I have to pull this other lever, and what that's going to do is alter the Hoik tooth exactly at this position. Okay. Now, previously we explained how all of these teleporters in the accumulator register, they all led back to the distributor. Okay, that was the sequence of events. The distributor passing into the accumulator register, wherever the memory, wherever we had an on state in memory, so on and so forth. However, in division, we want to make sure that at the very end here, we don't end up going back to the distributor, but instead we end up just killing off that skeleton. So this is where the mechanism will terminate. And to accomplish that, well, it's pretty easy. We just need to deactuate this particular Hoik tooth, prevent the skeleton from actually entering that final teleporter. Okay, so let's turn that on. Alright, so there we go. Now, what exactly are we doing when it comes to division? Well, first, let's work with an example. Okay, so the larger number that we're going to divide the smaller number into, the larger number will go into the accumulator. So let's suppose that number is 10. And let's suppose into 10 we'll be dividing 5. Okay, so the way that division operates is through multiplication in the following sense. We are going to be adding contents from memory to the accumulator as always. That never changes. So the trick is to check to see how many times the contents of memory can be transferred into the accumulator before we reach the maximum value. And this time there is no rollover, because remember, we altered that final Hoik tooth in the accumulator register, which means that once the maximum value has been reached in the accumulator, there is no rollover. It just stops the mechanism. At that point, the skeleton dies in the skeleton trap here. All right, so let's follow along. So just remember, we're doing 10 divided by 5, so our final answer should be 2. Okay, so when I take the complement, I'll transform this from 10 into 31 minus 10 plus 1. So I should end up with 22. Okay, so there we go. We got 22. So now, I'm going to start adding 5 to that 22, and I'm going to stop when I have reached the maximum value and I can't roll over anymore. So when I add the first 5 to my 22, I'll go up to 27. Okay, so that got added once. When I try adding it a second time, well, we'll end up going from 27 up to, well, the maximum 31, but then we can't roll over, and thus it terminates at that point. Okay, so it turns out here we will only succeed in transferring the contents of memory once, and that's it. Alright, so when this mechanism is turned on, as before, the skeleton starts at the MQ register. Okay, if we check the wiring, again, nothing has changed here. If you look at the blue wire, it sends the skeleton into the MQ register. Okay, so the MQ register will be entered the first time, and remember, this is now functioning as a binary counter, so 1 is going to be added into the MQ register. Then we're going to enter the distributor. The skeleton is going to enter the distributor, transfer the contents of memory once, and then we're back into the MQ register, so then we'll add another 1 into the MQ register, so then we're up to 2. Then the skeleton will go back into the distributor, attempt to add 5 yet again to the number, but then find that it is unable to overflow, and then it'll just be killed off. So the skeleton would never make it into the MQ register for a third time. Okay, so it'll only end up in the MQ register twice, but that's the answer that we're looking for. That's the result of the division, 10 divided by 5. Okay, let's demonstrate this. Okay, so we'll turn this on. There we go. So you saw that when the mechanism was operational, we managed to enter the MQ register twice, but the third time, skeleton didn't make it, ended up getting killed off in the trap. And we see that the final answer of 2 is now displayed in our MQ register. Alright, so let's reset everything. And let's try again. This time without an explanation, we'll just demonstrate the division. So let's suppose that we want to do 12 divided by 3. Turn those on for division. So 12 divided by 3, we should get a final answer of 4 appearing in the MQ register. Okay, take the complement. Oh, 5 appeared. Let me try that again. Yeah, shut these things off. Yeah, that's the problem. So I didn't get the right answer, but that's because I have to make sure that all of these white teeth reset to their correct positions. Again, I don't have a reset system here, so it's kind of a pain. I have to do this manually. So to reset all of these, here's what I'm going to have to do. shut these off so it doesn't manually count. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so yeah, it's a bit of a pain with this setup without a reset system. But yeah, checking down here, now all of the Hoik teeth are in the correct positions. They're all in the the actuated state. So now it should work properly. Okay, so let's try that again. So we got 12, and we're going to divide it by 3. Yeah, previously some of these Hoik teeth were in a deactuated state, so the skeleton never checked some of these inputs into memory. Okay, in any case, let's proceed. So again, for the division, we'll turn on both of these levers. So we'll take the complement and then do the calculation. So 12 divided by 3, we should get 4 appearing in the MQ register. Okay, take the complement. There we go. Alright, so 4 is our final answer. And again, if we check the distributor, it's messed up here. It has to be reset. There we go. Alright, so reset it again. So let's just try one more division here. Let's say we want to take 20 and divide that by 5. Okay, so 20 divided by 5. Okay, so again, turn on both of these levers, take the complement, and turn it on. There we go. So 4, once again, is our correct answer, the result of taking 20, dividing it by 5. So there we have it. The complement system, it's for subtraction and for division. So division is a little bit trickier, but this all showcases how exactly the wiring can be done. And as you see, the wiring is starting to get a little bit more complicated, but if it was clear to you exactly how these 3 registers combine together, the entire logic behind how they operate together, then it becomes a lot easier to make sense of the wiring. So at this stage, what I would suggest to you, if you're interested in building one of these computers yourself, you can try emulating what I've done here, or you can even try to engineer your own flip-flops and your own registers, and if you follow the same logic as I've presented here, then you should be able to put together an operational ALU. And one other thing to make note of here, this map will be available for download, so if you want to play around with some of these mechanisms, if you want to look at the individual components, the individual registers, or see how some of the components are combined, spend a bit more time examining the wiring, then you're welcome to do so. I'll make the download available in the description box of this video, and soon I'll have a link to a written guide that'll show schematics of all of these components, so that way you can study the wiring diagrams and the pictures to make sense of what's going on. As mentioned previously, when it comes to a lot of these Hoiktronics contraptions, if you look at just the wiring, when you look at the full mechanism, come back over here, again, it looks really complicated, but once the interlocking pieces are understood, and once it's understood how they interlock, it becomes much easier to make sense of all of the wiring. And you'll also note that in my full ALU, I have some reset tracks to the very top here and towards the bottom. This way, whatever the state is of the distributor, the memory, or the accumulator, I can just reset it back to starting positions, default positions. So if you are going to create your own computer, definitely you should add the reset tracks. Otherwise, it can be a pain to have to manipulate a whole bunch of levers in order to reset all of these systems. Okay, so hopefully this was enlightening to you if you were interested in how everything was put together to begin with, and you're interested in creating your own computer within Terraria, questions or comments, I welcome those. And again, I'll be linking the written guide, so any questions or comments can be made in that written guide on the official forums as well. Okay, so that's it for now. In upcoming videos, I'll be explaining other mechanisms such as the converter, along with other things relating to decimal outputs. Okay, so that's it for now. Bye for now.